Hello and welcome to another episode of Coventry Confidential. I am Francis Lombard. Some housekeeping before I bring on Chief Bud Meyers. My sister podcast, Portrait of an Editor, which is about the comic book industry, has a new episode up regarding the relaunch of Heavy Metal Magazine. And also on Sunday, June 1st, I will be hosting the Sunday matinee movie at the Booth Dimmick Library. It's The Birdcage, starring Gene Hackman and Robin Williams, and that starts at 2 o'clock, and it is completely free. So I'm going to jump in and welcome Fire Chief Bud Meyers. Thank you for coming on to Coventry Confidential.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on.
Let's just jump right into it about how did you end up becoming the Fire Chief of Coventry?
I came to Coventry in 2008 was when I moved into town. Actually, I joined North Coventry in 2008. Mm-hmm. I actually purchased a house in town later on that year. So with that, I had extensive background in the fire service prior to coming here. I got 47 years now in the fire service. I had taken several classes and courses, and it turns out that going through the years, I worked for Columbia Municipality. So I had a good background working in a municipality. And as time moved on, I went up through the ranks through North Coventry and finally became chief of North Coventry just before the merger of the quasi three departments, because at that time we had the town of Coventry Fire and EMS, Coventry Volunteer Fire Association, and North Coventry Fire Department. And in the process, we merged all three into one entity. And when that occurred in 2020, I was appointed the interim fire chief, and then moved to the fire chief. And we had a fire administrator at the time, Jimmy Mack. And then Jimmy Mack in, I think it was May of 2023, looked to retire. And when he retired, it was always part of our 5-year strategic plan to merge the fire administrator and the fire chief's position into one position. And the town council, along with the town manager at the time, John Elsesser, felt very confident I could fulfill both roles, and they took me on as a paid fire chief. So you're sitting paid fire chief for the town of Coventry.
There we go. And I know, as being somebody who's sort of new to Coventry, there is a history of North Coventry versus South Coventry, and the fire department sort of represented that. And do you feel, I don't want to get back into that history and just everything, but do you feel bringing everything together, seeing it was happening also during COVID too, but do you feel consolidating everything under one umbrella, that's been a bonus for the town? I mean, how is it working for us?
It actually has been very beneficial for the town. We don't like to lose track of our history. I will say my grandfather and my father were members of Coventry Volunteer Fire Association. Having knowledge of the history and remembering our past is really pertinent to our future. So, but it has been very beneficial. There was an upfront cost to it, rebranding, changing your name, signage, and that sort of stuff. Uniforms. It created a cost, but in the long run, now it's working to be a savings.
With the rebranding, as you called it, is that something that has to officially has to happen? It just doesn't overnight we're changing our name. There's rules and regulations because of you're dealing with being a firefighter.
There is. Ideally, we had a committee that was created for the merger. So that took 2 members from CVFA, 2 members from the Town of Coventry Fire and EMS Department, and 2 members from North Coventry. Oversight was the fire administrator. So there was actually somebody, if people were at odds, somebody to make a final decision. So it went rather smoothly. As far as the R1, what we call R1, R2, meaning operating the ambulance and as first responders in the town for doing medical calls, the town had already taken that over. So it was an easier move when we did the finalization merge.
So there is a lot of technical elements of merging the fire department. It wasn't out of, respect for the history, but also sort of how a fire department functions, basically.
Yeah. We had to make a whole new organizational chart, meaning, fire chief, deputy chiefs, captains, lieutenants. With that, the committee had to design and create job descriptions for all those positions. Those job descriptions had to go to the town council to get approved. So as we look to fill these positions and the roles within the fire department, it's something that we have to go by. OSHA does mandate that we have an organizational structure. They don't sit there and say exactly, your chief and deputy chief or chief and assistant chief, what hierarchy it goes, but they do require us to have an organizational structure. With that, they require us to have more so what our job is throughout the town, what our obligations are to cover, fires, hazmat calls, auto accidents, obviously medical calls. So,
and because of my day job working in factories, there's also, it's not just rushing out to an emergency. You have to maintain sort of who's doing what, with farms, chemicals, what to understand that you're not just running into something blind, basically, especially with whatever industry that's in Coventry or whatever is going on. That's also something you have to maintain and combine?
Yeah. So we have to, there's reportable stuff that comes into the fire marshal's office that we are made aware of, and certain products and that sort of stuff.
One thing I guess I should have asked you at the beginning was, what made you want to be a fireman?
Like I said, my grandfather was in it. My father was in it. So I kind of grew up with it. I always used to go with my father to the old firehouse where Akron Electric is located now. Can remember, playing pool in the upstairs while my father was working on apparatus in the apparatus bays, because he was a mechanic, and it just kind of caught my urge to, that. And when I got done with I was also in the Navy. So when you take an oath, you take an oath for life in the Navy to serve your country. So, what better way to help keep continuing to serve my country than to volunteer as a firefighter?
So speaking of volunteers, I know I was reading an article recently about an issue with volunteers throughout the state and stuff I hear about Coventry. And you are also not only the fire chief for Coventry, but also the president of the Connecticut Fire Chiefs Associations. And it seems to be an issue about finding volunteers. And that sort of, I have friends who, they watched Emergency One back in the 70s, and they're now firefighters, and a friend ended up being a fire chief in Massachusetts. Sounds like this story is sort of similar to yours. It was hanging around the fire department, and it sort of bit him. There was a bug that just bit him, and he felt he wanted to dedicate his life to it. what is the situation with volunteers for Coventry and statewide?
National too. It's not just it's across the board. Statewide, the state comptroller's office did a survey, and it was 62 point something percent of reduction in volunteer firefighters since 2017. The last survey that was performed by the Connecticut State Firefighters Association. So it is definitely an issue across the board of not only recruiting volunteers, but maintaining the volunteers. They've seen the average span of service from somebody who joins the volunteers anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And, we're trying to delve deeply into what are the issues that are creating this rapid turnover. And, some of the things we got to look at is cancer. Cancer is one of the things that is an occupational risk. And, firefighters are at a 14% higher risk of dying from cancer. And it's not just career firefighters, it's also volunteers that this involves with. We're looking at other things that go on. When we go respond to calls, we deal with all sorts of calls. Some of them are pretty graphic. The suicide rate for firefighters is higher than the normal suicide rate for the normal layperson. So these are some of the things that we're delving into, looking at as far as the retention side of it. It seems like recruitment, we can open the doors, we can get people in, but it's trying to hold on to those people. That's the avenue that's really happening. I just recently took on a recruitment officer and a retention officer. A job description was approved by the town council this winter, probably, I think it was February, maybe. I brought them on board. We're having an influx of people putting in for volunteers. Last year, we tried to start the live-in program have college people. So we actually have 2 applicants that are going to be looking to come on board and start in their fall semester. So that's a positive. We're hoping that it works out for them and they're happy with what's going on and they promote it a little bit more. Maybe we can get a couple more live-ins to help out. We're at 41 volunteers currently. Not saying all 41 are the most active people around, but we do have the volunteers there that are of the 41, we have 16 to 18 EMS people that are actually performing 12-hour duty shifts a month to help offset the cost of the ambulance. So, the volunteers are there. It's time consuming for them. When you sit there and you think about, we're averaging 4.5 calls a day. And some of those calls, if you come on to do an ambulance shift and you got a 12-hour shift and you have that amount of calls during that shift, that's 6 to 8 hours worth of time that you're on calls. And then that's not including the times that you need to do all the paperwork as an EMT and or the cleaning up of the apparatus and that sort of stuff. So and if you're doing night shifts, it doesn't leave you much room for sleep, and you got to go to work the next day. So
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what is the average of, so 4.5 calls in Coventry of a town of about just over 12,000.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much a national average? Is that, or is it above or below?
It would hard to say for the population. I look at Willimantic, and I was talking to a couple of the guys when we were down in the hospital, and they had already done 21 calls that day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, it's kind of population driven,
age driven.
Yeah.
Everything.
All that stuff comes. So, some towns you look at Bolton and they might do, 500 calls a year. So it's kind of hard to say what each town and or area performs for calls.
But if you're dealing an average of 4.5 calls a day, and each call is about 3 hours a day, the idea of having a volunteer or part volunteer to be able to pull all that off on a volunteer basis is a lot to ask.
It's impossible.
So you have to have some kind of.
So we do have paid staff.
Yeah,
for the ambulance. We have to. It's impossible to expect, especially during the daytime, when most people most volunteers are at work. There's just no way around it. Most people, the second and third shift work jobs have slowed down immensely. So most of the volunteers work, during the day hours, and we need to make sure we cover those calls. And we're blessed with the volunteers stepping up and doing duty shifts, but even simultaneous calls has increased. Friday night, we probably had 3 simultaneous calls. So while the first ambulance out, that it meant that we needed the second ambulance.
Oh, wow. And
to do that, you need the volunteers to get up and get out and assist with these calls. So, it's crazy how these things occur, but having a simultaneous call while the first ambulance out and having a second call, it happens quite frequently during the month. So you're probably looking anywhere from 20 to 30 times a month.
So for Coventry, and we eventually touch upon the budget because it is budget season. At the size of the town we need a functioning fire department that includes EMS that is capable of handling simultaneous calls every 20 times a month. We really need to have that. There's no way around it. If there was anything less, you could be running the risk of citizens having suffering. When you look at the numbers of the size of Coventry and the fire department and everything, and the size of the fire department, you're pretty much you have what we need to keep the citizens safe, basically.
Yeah, definitely. There's always been talk about regionalizing our EMS and that sort of stuff. Well, you kind of have to look at this is that when you talk regionalizing, if Andover's running calls, Columbia's running calls, Mansfield's running calls, we're running calls, Tolland's running calls, as busy as we are, how do you regionalize when you need an ambulance? They're happening all simultaneously. So who gets the priority? Who's going to get the ambulance? How long are you going to wait for another ambulance comes into the realm? We've seen an uptick in our mutual aid response of covering calls in Vernon because they're running 3 ambulances or 4 ambulances, and they're having multiple calls where they need an additional ambulance. It's not far-fetched to know that the population drives the need, and our population is there. It's driving the need to making sure we have an ambulance. We had one situation before we actually had merged and stuff like that, where somebody was waiting with a cardiac issue with a paramedic on scene, thank goodness, but 45 minutes to get an ambulance because our ambulance had already been out. The volunteers weren't around during the daytime. Andover couldn't get out. Columbia couldn't get out. They were waiting for a mutual aid ambulance to come. And by the time, it was 45 minutes later. And you don't want somebody to be sitting there with a cardiac issue for 45 minutes, without the proper, they had decent care with the paramedic, but it's not like they're at a trauma one center where they have the ability to rectify the situation going on with them.
And there's also the element of Coventry, its geography, the size that you have. Because I grew up in Munson, Mass, which is it's a small town, very similar to Coventry, but geography, it's big. There's a lot, and people are at every corner. And Coventry reminds me of that it takes you a while to get from one end to the other. And that's probably something else you have to, at times people go, why do we have so many fire stations? And I'm like, well, that helps lower your insurance, but also because of just the span of Coventry, the size of it, probably is that another reason?
Yeah, and that was looked at through the Matrix and the Patriz reports. They did a fire study for the town of Coventry, and that was what came about. They actually, what was it, 2000, 1998, 99, I guess. They actually said you need to build a firehouse on the backside of the lake because of the this need for that. There was already one up at Laidlaw Park, the north end, but these stations are strategically put into play for response reasons, and that was done through a fire study.
Does it also help because we don't have any kind of water system either? Is it allows the moving of water or having the availability of water, because it would just be based on whatever's in the trucks, right? Because there's no fire hydrant you can tap into.
Right. And that's where the property protection class that we have earned is a 5.5Y. And it takes into account there's a fire house within 5 miles of your resident, and 1,000, you're within 1,000 feet of a water source, you can receive a 5. You receive a 5Y because the town's a 5 or 5Y because everybody in town's within 5 miles of a fire station. The 5Y is not everybody's within 1,000 feet of a water source, and whether that's for us, it's a static water source because we only have one working fire hydrant worth anything in the town, and that's on 195 en route to Yukon to supply them with water.
Oh, okay. I know recently you became the president of the CT Fire Chiefs Association.
Yeah.
How does that work with you being also our fire chief? Can you describe a little more about that? And also how
yeah, sure. It definitely gives a little bit more voice for the small town of Coventry to be represented in the state and federal level. As the president, I'm on the Joint Council of Connecticut Fire Service Organization, and we bring leaders from all facets of the fire service, and with that, work directly with the state and federal lawmakers on issues that matter most. Obviously, we touched about recruitment and retention. The cancer initiatives are big threats that we've been working with. We've brought up things such as mortgage access, making that more easily accessible for volunteers. Another thing that is being worked on is health insurance for volunteers. There's a state statute that allows volunteers to go on a town's municipal's insurance plan, but they have to pay the full cost of that plan. So some towns are, for a retention purpose, are looking to say, hey, can we offer, 50-50 for a volunteer. We'll pay 50% of the insurance, the volunteer pay the other 50% of the insurance to help recruitment. And we're pushing for legislation that allows the towns to do that. We're looking at improving line of duty death benefits for families. One of the big things is the cost of fire apparatus and manufacturing delays. The cost of fire apparatus has jumped so much over the last few years. And some of it's because of EPA regulations, and some of it's because the parts aren't being manufactured as readily. And those are the initiatives that not only helps Coventry, but helps the state. It's been very eye-opening to be able to work toward this and stuff. So,
I was reading an article. It was a long article regarding the situation of fire truck manufacturing. And I know one of the conversations that we're having in Coventry is about replacing one of our ladder truck, right? And when I was reading this article, and then I think 5 minutes later, I heard or saw something that, Coventry's looking to buy a fire truck. And I'm like, oh my God, just what was laid out in front of me. You've touched upon just the parts and who's making them and the delays and everything. There's so many things you have to navigate just to get a new fire truck. And because it is such a specific vehicle, there's not this mass production. So, that adds to the cost and everything. I guess your job as fire chief, and that's a lot of a lot of work. I don't envy you. I'm sorry that you have to go through that.
It is. And, it's difficult when you have some people speaking that they can repair one of my fire apparatus for $50,000 and the parts are obsolete. So I don't know where with our Quint, which is our aerial, it's specifically built with an all steer ability, meaning that I can take that down any one of these small side streets of the lake. And if you've ever driven those side streets in a car, never mind a large fire apparatus, people would be amazed at how well this thing gets around. And by the time we could get a new one, this thing will be at 30 years old. At 30 years old, it costs more to keep it on the road at times than it does to replace it. And not only that, if the all-steer parts are obsolete and we lock that out, I'm not going to be able to drive that around not only the lake area, but there are some roads in the rest of the town that you just can't make the corners with this thing. And it pretty much puts it out of service for us. With replacing it too, and the thought of replacing this was that I have a heavy rescue truck and I also have an engine that are stationed up here. I can start reducing my fleet with just adding more water to this Quint, because our current Quint has 300 gallons. Our new one, we're proposing to put 750 gallons on this. And if you look at the track record of that ladder truck being the first apparatus on scene for a working fire, it is first on scene for a working fire, mainly because it's here at the firehouse that's manned. So if there's a fire call, somebody's here that gets in the truck and takes it to the scene. And you reduce, you're gaining water for a fire that doubles in size every 30 seconds.
It would be one thing, one upside, huge upside is just the supply of water that it will allow you guys to fight this fire and keep it from getting out of control. And it really is important, from what little I know about firefighting. It's the first response, really. It's how quickly you get there and what you can do immediately determines, the strategy of how you continue fighting it, right? It's all about timing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And supplies and what you have access to, basically. So if you can attack it immediately with everything, then that helps you maybe save the structure, basically. What could Coventry as a town, which from just this conversation we do need a fire department. What approach that the average citizen should see as the fire department, its role in their life? If my question's making any sense. How should we be looking at you as our volunteer fire department, the kind of support you need, or just how you keep us safe, basically?
Yeah. So we're a combination department because we have paid staffing for the ambulance currently. With that paid staffing, we do have qualified firefighters that cover the ambulance that can actually get out. One of the things that Captain Milan has been working on with me is our ISO rating. That's our protective class that we had talked about earlier. With having more people who are on shift that are firefighters, we're actually looking to be able to reduce our protective class down to a 4Y. The benefits of having people here is a timely response. When we had looked at when COVID hit, we pretty much lost quite a few volunteers, and on the EMS side, because people just were scared. They weren't sure. They didn't want to get COVID. This was affecting people's lives immensely. Even if you did survive, your ability to breathe properly and everything else like that was, questionable. So we ended up having to go look at going 24/7 with the ambulance. And when we looked at the response times, it would take us 15 to 16 minutes to get an ambulance with the volunteers out the door into somebody's house. Our response times now are averaging 8 minutes. So we're out of the door. We're at somebody's house, that is in cardiac arrest or a drowning, or that response time is cut almost in half. And to get somebody there that quick is what you need. And you said it. Same thing with fires. Getting a piece of apparatus on the fire scene is critical. You can start doing the work you need to do. When it comes to the budget, we do everything we can to keep our budget costs down, but we've been doing a zero increase budget. My fire line budget, I talked to the town council last year, that had actually been being decreased over the last 5 years by 14%. And my EMS budget, although we had to supplement that with contingency first with the initial come on, then they did it with the ARPA fund, and those funds have dried up. Yeah. And, now to cover the cost, it's more burden on the taxpayer. To offset that cost, like I said, I have the volunteers stepping up and doing, 12 to 24 hours a month to help offset the cost of paid staff. You don't want to drive the ones that were doing the work into a fatigue and start losing and giving them a burnout. Especially like I said, I covered a shift Friday night. We did those 7 calls Friday night. I got 2 hours sleep. For somebody to get 2 hours sleep and expect them to go to work the next day, you just can't expect that. When you're paying somebody to come here and do that, they understand the what's required of them. So, but
even with 7 calls, there's a fatigue factor just doing that shift too, not only going to work after.
Yeah, I mean, the fatigue factor. Those were minor calls. It wasn't like a major vehicle accident where you had extrication involved, or a working structure fire where you got several hours more of cleanup and everything else. Like these were, simplistic calls more so than your more advanced calls. And, those more advanced calls, going to somebody's home that committed suicide or going to a cardiac arrest, dealing with young children that are, those create much more stressful situations. And that's where that suicide avenue comes into play. People are getting the PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. It's so much so that the state has actually recognized that, and that can be a workman's comp claim from what, and I won't say from what first responders are actually respond to. It's fire, it's police, it's even dispatchers now taking the phone calls. Somebody screaming in the phone at you. You got to save my family. You got to do this. You got to do that. It can trigger certain people into a very stressful situation.
And it seems like with all the hazards of being a volunteer or even being a paid firefighter, that whatever money that becomes available that will help protect, you would like to try to get, better equipment, updated equipment, safe, or also just the ability to talk to somebody after, a bad situation, having to intervene in something.
Absolutely. When it comes to equipment, I've been trying to get our hydraulic tools for doing vehicle extrication replaced. I got 30-year-old hydraulic tools. We've been putting into our capital budget to start replacing these things for the past 6 years, and it keeps getting cut out of the budget because the budgets are so tight. You can't. When you sit there and you try to remove somebody from a vehicle, you have to actually take the vehicle away from that person. And that requires specialty tools to do that. And when you're trying to do that and they're 30 years old, you
don't know what surprises you might get.
Exactly. And ideally, I got other towns around us that can respond if something happens. But again, it's all dependent on what their call volume is. Are they already out on a call? And how long, what the travel time is to come to our town. Most times by the time you call somebody, it's 15 or 20 minutes before they're going to arrive. Mm-hmm. And within that amount of time, it could be detrimental for somebody being trapped in a vehicle.
So I've had you on for a little while longer than I expected. One thing I wanted to one last question is to talk about a letter, an editorial you wrote a few months ago as we all heated up with the budget discussion in Coventry. And I got it. We're all New Englanders, and I've said it before on the show, no one wants to pay taxes. But what are we paying for? And when just from this conversation, we're paying for a lot. When it comes to fire and EMS, we're getting a lot. The response times can make a difference. Just that. And then we can keep talking about all the other things. But if you would like to I don't know, it's been a while since I read it, and I know we were talking about it early before we recorded, but if we want to just talk about the gist of how you look at it, because your point of view of this town and what we do with our money is unique. Because of being the fire chief and all your experiences.
That was just bringing forth that, everybody in this town has specific needs and wants. When it comes to your children that are going to school, you want to make sure that they get a proper and good education. There's people who enjoy the lake, who are avid hikers or sports people who want good ball fields and that sort of stuff. I can guarantee people want to make sure that their roads do not have any snow or ice on them in the wintertime, because they want to be able to get from point A to point B, and most of the time that's to go to work.
Yeah, without a delay.
without a delay. And, and same thing with our police department. If you have a situation, you want somebody to arrive at when you need them. If these are the things that everybody's looking for, it comes at a cost. There's just no way around it. I'm right along with everybody. I don't want to pay any more in taxes than I have to, but sometimes you have to just accept that we have to, as citizens, to somebody might not use my services ever in their lifetime, but there's somebody that you may know that we've provided services for, or it could be your neighbor, it could be a relative or whatever, and they're grateful for that. And as neighbors, I'm willing to pay my taxes so it benefits somebody who's raising children and they want better education. And I'm willing to pay my taxes so somebody can get the ambulance services that they need, or the police services that they need, and the roads cleared like they need. So that's what it kind of was about.
So the editorial is basically about, the aspect of community, I guess.
Yeah. We all work together.
Yeah. What are I guess, the priorities of our community? And also, I think, from what I remember, just being honest with ourselves about what kind of community we are. I mean, some people just say, I can't afford this. I understand that. But there's downsides to not funding the fire department, basically. And there's downsides to a lot of things, not funding the schools, or even the roads. So, there's, I guess, some hard decisions of what we want to do and what we want to keep and build.
Yeah, and they are hard decisions, and ideally, a lot of people are for roads or school or fire department or police service, but they're not for everything else. That's too much money. So you get those that would, I support the fire department, but I don't support the school, or I support the fire department, but I don't support putting more money into roads or something, or somebody, I support the police, and it's ideally, if you support one, you should support them all.
Well, Chief, thank you very much for coming on and giving up a part of your Monday to talk. This was very informative. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you would like to say before we sign off?
Just remember, we need constant funding. Legislative support's huge, and public awareness. I mean, if people have questions of what we do or what we're looking at or anything, I think I pretty much say it all the time. I have an open door policy. Come talk to me. Come talk to me. I'd be more than happy to explain what happens here.
Awesome. Well, I hope people take advantage of that. And thank you very, very much for being open about everything.
And thank you for having me.
I'll see you around.
You got it. Bye.